Jared Kotz. Jared was one of many at the Risk Waters Financial Technology Congress, and managed to be one of his many survivors due to some unusual circumstances. This event happened on the 106th floor of the North Tower, in the infamous Windows of the World restaurant. Jared's task was to help set up the publication stand featuring companies under the Risk Waters umbrella. However, he took his time in showing up that morning, after he stumbled upon an injured bird on the side of the street. After tending to it, he arrived to find that the event manager, Paul Bristow, had already set up most of the stand. However, there was a batch of publications missing, so Jared was sent out to retrieve them. He rode his bike all the way to the Lafayette Street office, deciding to check on the injured bird on his way back. By the time he returned to the North Tower, it had been hit by American Airlines Flight 11. Jared Kotz is later quoted as saying, "Paul is responsible for my being alive because he got there early and pulled all of our marketing materials out of the boxes and placed them in the displays, a job I was slated to do. If he hadn't done that work, I would have still been there when the plane arrived. I needed an excuse to leave and go rescue that bird, and Paul's efforts allowed me to make the choice that took me out of harm's way." Michael Jackson. On the night of September 10th, 2001, Michael was performing one of his 30th anniversary celebration concerts, which was located in Madison Square Garden, New York. Following the concert, he was supposed to have a meeting the next day at the World Trade Center in order to return a $2 million watch he used for the show, along with a diamond necklace worn by his close friend, Elizabeth Taylor. He stayed up past 4 a.m. thanks to his mother, who had an extensive phone call with him. She wasn't aware of his appointment the next morning, so she kept him awake for a while. This led to Michael, someone who had struggled with sleep deprivation before, to sleep in, missing his appointments. His family, worried about Michael, called him to assure he was okay. His brother, Kermaine, later wrote about this in his book, "You Were Not Alone, Michael, Through a Brother's Eyes." Here he said, quote, "My mother had stayed up with him all the way until 4 in the morning, and he just slept. He missed his appointments, which was great." Michael has always been thankful to his mother for this, and he'd end up doing a charity concert called United We Stand, What More Can I Give?, which occurred over a month after the attack. Seth MacFarlane. The night that Michael was giving that concert, Seth was giving a lecture at the Rhode Island School of Design, which is where he went to college. The next morning, he was supposed to catch a flight, that being the infamous American Airlines Flight 11, which was the first to hit the North Tower. It was originally supposed to fly to Los Angeles from Boston, allowing Seth to get home. Instead, he got drunk the previous night with some of the school faculty. His flight itinerary stated the plane was supposed to leave 10 minutes later than it did, with this preconception causing him to be late. He later described his airport experience. "I got to the counter and I said, 'Yeah, I'm booked on Flight 11, and the woman behind the counter said, "I started, you're too late. They just closed the gate." And I said, "Alright, well, I'll take the 11 o'clock. I went into the lounge, fell asleep, woke up about 45 minutes later to a commotion, and the first plane had hit, and sat there and watched the second plane hit, and they announced what flight it was. And I turned to the guy next to me and said, "My God, I know that. That was the flight I was supposed to be on. I was late. I missed it." Mark Wahlburg. Similar to Seth MacFarlane, Mark was also supposed to board Flight 11, but a week prior he decided to change his plans. He and his kids decided to see a friend's movie at the Toronto Film Festival, but this hasn't stopped him from speculating what could have happened if he boarded that flight. Even though his story isn't as interesting as the others on this list, I just had to include it due to some of the statements he made regarding the attacks. In an interview with Men's Journal, he said, "If I was on that plane with my kids, it wouldn't have went down like it did. There would have been a lot of blood in that first class cabin, and then me saying, 'Okay, we're gonna land somewhere safely, don't worry.'" He later apologized for this, stating, "To speculate about such a situation is ridiculous to begin with, and to suggest I would have done anything differently than the passengers on that plane was irresponsible. I deeply apologize to the families of the victims and my answer came off as insensitive. It was certainly not my intention." Greer Epstein. Greer was an executive director for the financial company Morgan Stanley, with her working in the South Tower. At around 8:40 a.m., she and a colleague decided to go for a cigarette break, not only to relax, but to also discuss an upcoming work meeting privately. The two took the elevator, feeling the slightest jolt from it on the way down. She didn't think much of this, however, since the elevator was known to jolt like that. But that was no normal bump, as when she and her colleague exited the building, they saw a multitude of others staring at the North Tower, which was just struck by Flight 11. Only about 15 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 would strike the South Tower, which would have killed her almost instantly if Greer didn't take that cigarette break. Rob Herzog. Herzog worked as the vice president of operations for the insurance company Marsh & McLennan's, with him working on the 96th floor of the North Tower. On the morning of September 11th, he was running late. He had to stop by his nearby post office. After that, he took 2 subway trains south to work, transferring to the 59th Street station to board the Express A train. However, on that particular morning, it was especially crowded. Rob, having claustrophobia, decided to get back on the local train. This setback was what caused him to be late, though this was weirdly lucky, as he missed the attacks by 5 minutes. At 8:50 a.m., he watched as smoke emanated from the North Tower. Hundreds of his colleagues would perish, which could have possibly been his fate. He'd have survivor's guilt for the years following, though would eventually quit his corporate job in 2002 and found the company Zog Sports. This mysterious photographer. You might have seen the Blame It on Jorge video on this topic, which is actually what inspired me to make this list in the first place. I'll link it down below if you want to check it out, but essentially, Jorge pieces together the context of this photo, a photo in which we don't know its true photographer. The image was first mentioned in a New York Times article from May 2002, which features testimonies from those who survived the initial attack on the North Tower. It mentions 2 victims named Peter Alderman and William Kelly, who were salesmen for Bloomsburg LP. Both were also attending the conference at Windows of the World, and had this photo taken by them from an unknown photographer. Many tried finding this person's identity, with the only credit being from the Bloomsburg company themselves. The photo would stay obscure for over a decade, though a French YouTube channel archiving a 911 call from that day shows it. More context was given in 2021, due to a testimony written by Colleen Kelly for a Senate Judiciary Committee. The photo shows her late husband, William, and she describes who took it. She says that the woman must have left the building before 8:30 a.m., which gave her enough time to leave the building before the first plane hit. This was due to her camera lens breaking, which is sheer luck in my opinion. We still don't know her identity or if she's even alive, but we do know that she was a replacement for a different photographer named Ron Jotz, who was fired the week before. It seems he narrowly avoided the attacks too. Barrett Naylor. Finally, we're onto someone that narrowly avoided 2 terrorist attacks, all thanks to premonitions he had. Barrett was a Wall Street executive who worked at the Twin Towers, though he was also a skeptic who seemingly believed in the paranormal. On the morning of February 26, 1993, Barrett exited the Grand Central Station and got a strange feeling, a feeling that made him want to turn around and go back home. He did, which caused him to avoid the World Trade Center bombings that morning. The same thing happened on September 11, 2001, 8 years later. He got a strange feeling and went back home, turning the television on to see that his place of work had been attacked. He was quoted as saying, "Something told me that it was time to go home. I should just turn around and go back home." Those 2 premonitions saved his life.